Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. This week we discussed the so-called REPowerEU plan the European Commission launched last month. We've had several weeks to digest the content, so in this episode we will delve into the details. Can Europe cut 2/3 of Russian gas consumption this year and fully by 2027? What will be the cost and who will pay? What's achievable in the short term and what can be done over 5 years? And where will we be by 2030? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss this and much, much more are Ilaria Conti of the Florence School of Regulation. A warm welcome, Ilaria.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And Dries Acke of Solar Power Europe. Also a warm welcome to you, Dries.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk about the main idea behind the so-called REPowerEU plan. What is the main idea? Is it just to end the EU's dependency on Russian fossil fuels? Dries, if I could start with you.
Absolutely. This is, in fact, a new agenda for Europe. In Versailles, a couple of months ago, the European Council agreed to look at reducing Russian fossil fuels as soon as possible. And now what we see with REPowerEU is the Commission's concrete agenda towards that. So it's quite a turning point, I should say. The green transition, to some extent, is actually recognized now for its security merits. The political attention is certainly increasing. Accelerating renewables and efficiency has become a matter of national security.
What's your view here, Ilaria? Is it realistic to be able to stop using Russian gas by 2027 and cut 2/3 by the end of this year?
Well, let's say it's the ambitious plan that the Commission seemed to have displayed with the REPowerEU. Actually, we've seen a series of very interesting and ambitious publications and targets released since the beginning of the energy crisis. The REPowerEU is certainly one of them. And in my view, the scope here is really almost killing two birds with one stone, because what the Commission says is that the scope is to reduce rapidly the dependence on Russian fossil fuels by fast forwarding the clean transition. So it's actually pursuing two targets at the same time, which we imagine is not easy, but that's precisely what the REPowerEU wants to do. And the main instruments are diversification, saving energy. So and this will be actually a very important one, sometimes a bit neglected. And also speeding up the transition with investments and reform. So all good ideas, ambitious, as I said. And to reply to your question, I think it will be possible to cut Russian supply by the end of the year by 2/3. That's the plan. The question is how, at what cost? And I think the general agreement is that it won't be painless. I don't agree with those who say that it will be a bloodbath, but certainly we have to take into account the social costs of accelerating and doing without Russian gas.
Perfect. I'd like to return to that point a little bit later, Laura, but if I can ask you, Dries, to see how we've had a sort of flurry of different packages over the last 2 years. We have the Fit for 55, the Green Deal, the recovery plan. How does this fit in, REPowerEU, into that big picture? Is it taking different parts of all the packages, or is it a separate package altogether?
Well, it's important to understand the different starting points of these packages. The Green Deal and the Fit for 55 agenda are primarily climate agendas, looking to accelerate the clean energy transition from that point of view. The Green Deal also looked at the socioeconomic context around it, environmental justice, just transition, and all of that. The REPowerEU is very different from a context. This is about energy security, and it's part of the European Union's response to the Russian aggression and the war at its borders, or on its continent, if you will. So in a way, the packages do align surprisingly well from the point of view that renewables and efficiency are, thank God, also helping us with the energy security measures. So basically, we see those two agendas coming together, and we're realizing the security merits of things like solar, wind, electrification, and efficiency. Of course, the REPowerEU, because of its different entry points, because of the fact that it's not at its heart a climate agenda, has uglier elements as well, if I may put it that way. Like, for example, a return to gas import infrastructure. Most of that's completely unnecessary. And above all, I would also highlight the international messaging from the Commission as part of its REPowerEU package, being very much around gas, drill, baby, drill. That's what the world hears from the Commission. So it's quite dominated by a call for gas outside of Russia. And that's a signal that is difficult to ignore. And it's actually a wrong signal to some of the developing nations looking at developing their country based on some economic pillars. And we see that, for example, in Africa, the message is really picked up as saying like, okay, Europe will need our gas so we can safely explore that. While actually the message is that Europe is reducing tremendously its fossil fuel use and gas use in the next years. So it's a bit of a paradox that we need to kind of be on top of, and the Commission will have to manage that carefully within the context of international climate negotiations as well.
So you're saying there's a bit of mixed messages going out here?
Yeah, I think so. Almost paradoxical messages. If you are Senegal, if you are Mozambique, the message you get is Europe will be a trustworthy, stable demand pool for your gas resources that you never knew whether or not to develop because it was a big investment. Will there be a return? And now it feels like Europe will be that stable imports place and that stable demand pool and partner. And that's just misleading because Europe is going to reduce enormously their fossil fuel use and may leave some of these developing countries into the resource trap and into choosing wrong pillars for its economic development. The Commission is aware of that, that's for sure. But it is a message that they will need to manage going forward very strongly.
And it's not just gas, obviously. It's also South Africans trying desperately to find new sources to export to Europe for their coal supply, that is. So, Ilaria, what's your view here about the mixed message that Dries is talking about?
Not sure I agree. I mean, I see this element as well, of course, but I also heard very clearly Frans Timmermans, the Commissioner Timmermans, saying that, what we are trying to strike now with this alternative countries, with these countries by diversifying supplies, is a sort of short-term deal for fossil fuels, so for coal, for gas, for whatever we need at the moment. We are all aware that we are working under exceptional circumstances, that the likely shortage in supply we are going to face next winter is something exceptional. It was not foreseen. It's something to cope with, that we have to cope with urgently, and therefore that's why we are looking for immediate resources, the fastest resources we can get, and these are unfortunately fossil fuels. But we are also at the same time trying to negotiate already with the same countries a longer-term deal. These are really the words of Timmermans: short-term deal to cope with the immediate emergency, and then a longer-term deal with the same countries, trying to ensure imports for Europe of renewable sources, so that we will have in the medium longer term we will be able to continue the sustainability policies that we have quite rightly put in place in previous years before the start of the war. So I think that's the plan. And to me, it sounds very good, because in the longer term, the only possibility we will have of being really independent energy-wise for Europe, it will be renewables, investing in renewable sources so that we will be able to cover our energy demand as much as possible with internal domestic production.
So Ilaria, you talked about the cost of the REPowerEU plans here. I mean, have you got any figures at hand here, and who actually pays for these plans? Quite a big question there.
It is. Yeah. It is. I don't have the ambition to have the right answer for that. What I can see is definitely that there have been a number of measures, good measures, I would say, put in place, or at least proposed. Of course, now we are discussing about proposals from the Commission, and now most of these proposals are in the hands of the Parliament, of the European Parliament and the Council. So if, let's say, that there is a a speedy implementation and acceptance of such measures, we will be fairly covered with fairly covered, partly covered with social costs. We have the Social Climate Fund. We have the REPowerEU has already planned for 300 billion euros investments to sustain this target, the achievement of this target. So we are not talking about peanuts, to be honest. So I think these are all good measures, and the Commission is well aware of the cost. And this is also demonstrated by the fact that it has started engaging in some industry-related initiatives, as Dries surely knows, the EU Solar Industry Alliance, but also the electrolyzer declaration. So it seems that the Commission is aware of the cost. It's trying to involve the industry as much as possible so that there are investments going in the right direction. I have to be less or a little bit more critical towards instead the short-term measures that were implemented by the member states as to compensate, as to mitigate the rise in energy prices. We know that these measures were suggested already with the toolbox in October, short-term measures aiming to provide relief to consumers, to vulnerable consumers, to startups as well. But they were all meant to be targeted and accurately designed. This has rarely happened, I must say, in the member states. What we have seen has been rather totally blanket subsidies, caps, grants, tax cuts. That they were not targeted, but they were really extended and this we know that is something detrimental. I mean, which waters down the effectiveness of such measures, of course. So hopefully this pattern will change, and there will be measures that are more targeted, really trying to support those parts of the economy that need this support the most.
Absolutely. And what's your view, Dries? Do you think that member states will work towards more targeted measures? It's as Ilaria said, maybe it's the easiest is to do just a blanket, just as sort of a subsidy that covers all kind of industries, although that will have the unforeseen consequences. What do you think?
No, I very much agree with what Ilaria was setting out. One would hope that there's a move towards more targeted measures, because for the moment we see indeed more of the blanket checks. Now, it's not an easy time to be a politician. That's for sure. Inflation is very, very high. It's unprecedented, or at least it's been multiple decades that we've seen this. But it's going to be really important to keep the focus on the structural solutions. So that's what I'm mostly worried about, that the short-term interventions appease, let's say, the tensions and make politicians feel like they tick the box. Yeah, well, actually, the structural solutions to hedge ourselves against the volatility of fossil fuel prices, because that's really what we're looking at, is to accelerate the fossil-free solutions. Yeah, so to really make sure that solar, winds, and electrification, also from a tax regime, we really need to see that tax shift away from taxing electricity, like with the free electricity as much as possible from taxation burdens, and actually shift that to the more fossil-heavy and carbon-intensive alternatives that we use now. Renovations, heat pumps, electric vehicles. That's where the structural solutions lie. These things can scale relatively quickly, like we're really talking a couple of years. And then we are in a world where we are structurally resilient against those kind of shocks going forward. So that's a perspective that I'm hoping politicians are not losing because they've done a short-term intervention. That's going to be the challenge.
Yep. I mean, I think you point out clearly that politicians have a very tough time at the moment, and it's not easy. And at the same time, they're voted in by their own national electorates, not by regions or by across the EU. And I think maybe that's at the core of some of the issues here in terms of there's talk of an energy purchasing platform. I mean, how would this work in practice? You see, certain countries who are very dependent on Russian gas or gas for their industry will do it utmost to sort of go out there and do their own thing, whereas the Commission wants to force countries to work together. How do you see this working out in practice, Ilaria?
there's not enough information yet to understand how this platform will work in practice. What we read in the REPowerEU is that this platform should serve the purpose of, at a second stage, it should serve the purpose of facilitating joint purchasing of not only of gas, but also hydrogen. So it is, in principles, it would have an extended scope. But at the moment, how it will work in practice, it's a bit difficult. I have some reserves, I would say, reservations on this platform, because I think that while it's definitely something which sounds very good, so I fully understand the political value of proposing a mechanism by which member states can join and show, the strength of Europe when it comes to negotiating energies. That just like, and this is often the comparison which is made, just like in the case of vaccination. So in COVID times, Europe managed to actually join forces for the purchasing of vaccines. But I think it's extremely dangerous to make such a comparison, because we are talking here about very different things. We are talking about, for example, in the case of gas, I'm not leaving aside hydrogen, which is still a nascent market, so anything is still very much open. But for gas, what we have is already a European single market for gas, which has proved to work very well. And gas is regularly purchased by companies, so by private entities. For member states, it would be a first time that, after market liberalization, that take the initiative and take the role of becoming actors on the market. So for me, this at the moment includes more question marks than real guarantees for success, particularly as I believe that in this situation, it will take time also to set up such a platform, and to start for member states starting to do something which is not really in their core. So I believe that for this platform should be really carefully designed in order to be successful, and not to lead to detrimental effects on the market, particularly for citizens who will then eventually have to pay for an infrastructure that might not bring any benefit in costs in financial terms for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a task to then plan and manage that kind of a common energy platform. Absolutely, you're saying, the markets run professionally by traders and by companies, and then suddenly, if member states were to take that over, that's quite a task.
Particularly as the suppliers, the counterparty would be the same counterparties for companies that companies usually negotiate bilateral agreements with. So that's the question is. Would such a platform have the power, the market power, to come to better agreements, better negotiations, better deals than the market companies would do normally on the market? Absolutely.
But there are also, in the REPowerEU plans, there's the targets for renewable energy has increased from 43% to 45% by 2030, Dries. I mean, that's upping the ambition there. But one of the key obstacles to renewables growth, isn't it, is the very slow permitting processes. In some countries, it can take up to nine years to get a permit to build a wind farm, and there's probably similar ones for solar. How do you see this playing out? This sort of speeding up the rollout of renewables here, Dries?
No, so I think it is very positive that the Commission is putting its finger on an important problem, like a real world obstacle, a bottleneck. And that's, it has taken the time to bring this topic to the forefront. Yeah? So with the guidance, an indication of go-to areas and several other things overriding public interest. It is, of course, true that the European Commission has limited competencies. This is a very national competence, very distributed on even the local level. So it's multi-governance level down from national. It's quite complex. But the Commission has given that signal to member states to sort this out, to focus on this. Now, of course, we must say that what we don't want is that this problem is escalating. We feel that the Commission, with its language around go-to areas and exempting from environmental permitting and overriding public interest, is somehow using terms that could actually increase the tension and the confrontation around this between a corporate-driven renewables deployment on the one hand, and more of a public perception and public engagement on the other hand. So we, as a solar industry, we're certainly looking at merging both sides of things. I think solar has a lot of benefits and options in terms of multiple use of certain lands, be it through building integrated or floating solar, or rooftop is probably the most important one. So we rather talk in terms of priority areas rather than go-to zones, because if you say go-to zones, you almost de facto say, and all the other zones are no go-to zones, and that would give a bit of a wrong signal. I think solar in particular, but also wind, has a good track record of business models that really involve communities as well, through community energy schemes. They come in different shades and colors, where local communities, municipalities benefits. So it's not only in terms of participation and let's say engagements, having been consulted, but actual being a shareholder, being part of the revenues and seeing the benefits of that local renewables engagement. So what we want is to intensify these conversations. It's been a key topic, a key obstacle that the Commission is now giving attention to. That's very positive. But the bottlenecks may lie differently. Like one bottleneck that we see, for example, is locally skilled administration. So actually, sometimes the bottleneck is not more than the fact that on the local permitting level, they can't follow with the amount of applications, and that just takes time. So we are talking to city networks, to local authorities, regions, to actually look at education programs and skilling programs to make sure that even on the local level where these decisions ultimately need to be taken, that the responsible administration is aware and skilled up to make the right decisions. Those things are probably more important to get right than exempting renewables from environmental impact assessments. That gives a bit of a mixed message that we do need to be careful about.
Guys, I'm aware we are running out of time, so much more to discuss, but I think we've covered the main points here. So Dries and Ilaria, thank you very much for being guests on the Montel Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, Richard.
Many thanks to you.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.